Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Politics Today, and in this programme we shall be discussing the Commission of Enquiry, looking at the discrimination against Christians in the workplace in this country as they have now released their interim report, and we'll also be discussing one pastor's story of being discriminated for standing on biblical values. And in this programme today I'm joined by Robert Harris from Voice for Justice UK, together with Pastor Peter Simpson. So well done for coming on the programme. I'll start off with you, Rob. It's good to have you back, and thank you for all the help that you've been able to do with me on Behind the Headlines, particularly focusing on the US presidential elections. And you're here also to discuss this new interim report looking into the discrimination against Christians that gives us an idea of the extent that Christians are discriminated against. So do you want to just share with us really why this commission report is so important and where we are halfway through?
Well, virtually every day we read in the newspapers about issues concerning freedom of speech, people getting into trouble with the authorities, maybe in the workplace. And the role of this Commission of Enquiry is to investigate, to study over a minimum of a 2-year period, the nature, context and scale of discrimination faced by Christians on account of their faith. And can I clarify, it's actually wider than the workplace. It's in every possible social context. It may be something people have experienced online, on the street, with public authorities. The workplace is just but one important part of it. I think we also should remind ourselves right at the start of this discussion about what the law is. The law is, largely speaking, on our side. You know, you've got the Human Rights Act 1998, which incorporated the European Convention on Human Rights. Article 9 is about the freedom to express your beliefs, to express your speech. There's also the freedom of expression. And these rights, these very, very precious freedoms, originated, at least in modern history, from the UN Declaration of Human Rights. And that was all drafted in the wake of the atrocities of the Nazi crimes against humanity. So these are very, very precious freedoms. And just one more point about law, the Equality Act 2010. There are 9 protected characteristics, one of which is religion. So you are a protected person when you express your views. Sexual orientation, marriage, age, disability, and no one right is more important than the other. They all have equal say in our society. So that's very important just to say at the beginning of our conversation.
Wonderful. I'm glad you clarified the legal position on that one. And Peter, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on the programme. And personally, can I thank you for what you do in standing up for the gospel. It's not easy being a street preacher today, as we'll find out. But share with us and share with our viewers how you came to faith in the Lord Jesus Christ and why and how the Lord led you to become a street preacher preaching the gospel in what is now a kind of virtually a hostile environment.
Well, I became a Christian in my late teens, early 20s, a gradual process, came under conviction of sin, came to realise I was not right with God and I needed to make my peace with God. And during this period, I was at university. I felt I had to go to a church which was more distinctly Bible-believing. I came to see that Christ is the only Saviour and I needed to trust in Him. After university, I spent 12 years in accountancy, but then felt a strong leading to go into the ministry. So I spent a year at Bible college and then became minister of the church, which I'm currently at. That was 34 years ago.
Amazing. And share what it's like to be a street preacher these days and how the Lord really led you to take the gospel to our city centres.
Well, it's invigorating. It's a totally necessary work. Every time I do it, the more I think how important this is, because there's so little Christian input into our national life these days. And all our national institutions are basically anti-Christian and promoting a woke liberal outlook on life. So I find that open-air ministry is absolutely essential. It's no use preaching the gospel in the four walls of a church where you've got no people who are who are unbelievers and who need to hear the gospel.
Excellent, yep.
And what inspired me to begin it was in 2003, which was the 300th anniversary of the birth of John Wesley, who, along with George Whitefield and a few others in the 18th century, helped to transform the whole character of this nation through open-air preaching.
Absolutely, and the United States as well. So, Robert, the interim report, which is halfway through from the Commission of Enquiry, looking into the discrimination against Christians, has been published recently. The time span covers from October 2023 to June 2024. There were 17 people who shared their experiences of being discriminated against us as Christians. But share with us what the initial findings are and the true extent of marginalisation and discrimination against Christians in this country.
In addition to those case studies featuring in the report, there were some others that didn't feature in the interim report because they were anonymous hearings, and the findings from those hearings will eventually feature in some anonymised form when we produce the final report at the end of the 2 years. So based on the evidence so far, there does appear to be clear evidence of problems where the freedom to practice and manifest one's Christian faith is being progressively reduced and in some cases entirely ignored. And it seems to be the result of activists, secular activist organisations who have particular ideological agendas, and they're not exactly sensitive to Christian beliefs, shall we say. And in the case studies that feature in this interim report, there's a lot of accusations of bigotry, intolerance and hatred, where people have simply expressed a view, maybe quoting the Bible, maybe just giving a particular view on a contemporary issue through a biblical lens, and they face, in the workplace context, in some cases, disciplinary proceedings, and in certain cases, they've actually lost their job. May I say, I said a few moments ago that the law is largely on our side, and indeed on the side of anyone who has the right to speak freely about what they believe in. But there is this question about how the law is applied or misapplied in particular cases, and also, dare I say this, I think some police officers, and they do have a lot of burden on them, I appreciate that. I don't think, this is my personal view, I don't think a lot of them understand the parameters of the law and where freedom of speech ends and the state intervention begins, as it were. I don't think they fully appreciate that, and perhaps it's an issue of training. That's something to be maybe determined as part of our final report about why the police are going down the path they're going down. But let's not just focus on the police. There's also many civil issues in the workplace, people being cancelled online. There's a whole range of scenarios that people are giving evidence about.
And of course, Christians working in civil service
Absolutely.
as well, which is also a major problem. Peter, do you want to share with us your story? Now, you've got two interesting stories. One dates back to December 2020 in High Wycombe, where police were called in when you were actually preaching on the streets of High Wycombe, and then in Uxbridge, used to be Boris Johnson's constituency, back in August 2021, when the police effectively came to actually close you down from preaching the gospel.
Yes, well, the High Wycombe incident, they're both very similar. The High Wycombe one was due to a complaint, but there is never any indication when you are approached about a complaint. The complainant has disappeared. They're not on the scene. So it's only hearsay as to what the offence was. But, you know, someone complained about the preaching in High Wycombe, and I would have been upholding the traditional biblical view of marriage, but only as a small part of the general gospel preaching. Now, the Uxbridge incident, I stated, again, just as a part of the general gospel preaching, sort of based on all have sinned and come short of the glory of God, I gave the illustration of we live in a society which has turned its back on the Christian faith, and this is manifested, for example, by the redefinition of marriage. And that is all that I said. But apparently, some people were upset by this. They rang in to the police, who initially 2 officers turned up and said that multiple complaints had been received. I'd only been preaching for 15 or 20 minutes. I don't really know how multiple complaints could have been received. And I asked how many is multiple, and they wouldn't say. But the police didn't really give me opportunity to put my side of everything. And after a short while, no less than 12 further officers turned up. So altogether, 14 police officers came to apprehend a Christian preacher who was simply upholding biblical teaching. Now, because there were 14 police officers present, a crowd gathered. I struggled to get a crowd to gather. The only reason a crowd gathered was because of all the officers. But the police claimed that I was creating a public order incident, but there'd been no verbal dissent, no one had gesticulated at me. There was no public order problem at all. But anyway, the police instructed me to leave the town on the grounds that I had been engaging in homophobic hate speech. And I felt that I ought to comply because I sensed that they were threatening arrest if I did not comply. So I left and packed up all the equipment, and my helpers as well left. But using a Christian solicitor, I spent literally the next 2.5 years trying to get a formal complaint out of the Metropolitan Police for the way I was treated, and they refused point blank to apologise.
That's horrendous. Considering the spate of burglaries, knife crimes and everything else, to actually find 1 police officer in the streets, let alone 13, to actually shut down a very dangerous street preacher like yourself, yeah, I don't know what's it got into their thinking whatsoever. But share with us your thoughts on how Peter was approached by the police. I mean, 13 police officers. It's incredible, accusing him of committing hate crime and inappropriate comments. Share with us how this is a fundamental attack, not only on freedom of speech, but also on freedom of religion in this country.
Well, it is an absolutely fundamental attack on freedom of speech. Look, we all know that the police are there to investigate crimes, burglaries, physical assault, terrorism, and you name it. There's a long list. And for them to be bothered with spending their resources on a person who is just going about his business, a pastor who's preaching the gospel, it's been a freedom for hundreds of years. Don't the police know this? And, you know, there's this thing called a heckler's veto. It's a phrase that refers to this idea that when you have a crowd of people and they don't like what the speaker is saying, the moment someone heckles the individual, that means that person must stop speaking. And this came up in discussions with the Mayor of London's office, or rather in the document, when they reviewed the complaint that the pastor made about the incident that happened. And his solicitors were saying, you know, there's no heckler's veto in law. You can't simply have a member of the public who doesn't like something and they can close down what's being discussed. May I just refer to a very important case which you yourself in the testimony that you gave before the Commission referenced. It's Redmond Bate. It's a case involving preachers, and the judge made some very interesting points about what freedom of speech means. He says if it means anything, it has to include the person who is going to say something that is irritating, contentious, eccentric, heretical, provocative. The only condition is that there's no incitement to violence. Well, of course, that doesn't apply here. There's no question of incitement to violence in these circumstances. So freedom of speech can't mean anything if you're only allowed to say what people want to hear. It means nothing.
No, absolutely. We start to live in a authoritarian state when you can only have one point of view. Share with us, Peter, how did you feel intimidated by these 13 police officers in the high street in Uxbridge? And share with us your thoughts of what you experienced when you were effectively silenced and shut down because you were preaching a biblical message in the high street there in Uxbridge.
Well, I didn't feel intimidated, but I felt very annoyed. And I also felt that there was a great indignity taking place. I'm not worried about my personal dignity, but in my office as a Christian minister, how dare they treat a Christian minister going about his lawful business in this way for simply upholding the biblical nature of marriage. And so I was shocked at this assault on my freedom of speech, and particularly by the use of the word homophobic, which is basically a device simply to shut down sensible, reasonable debate.
No, of course. And yeah, tell us about why it was so important to interview Peter for the Commission of Enquiry, because I know that you did it, and any of our viewers who want to see that, you can go online and watch that on YouTube.
Well, the United Kingdom is still, technically, one might say, a Christian country. It's difficult to know how many people are actually practicing Christians. I suspect there's a larger number of people who might identify with cultural Christian values. The king, when he takes his oath during the coronation, makes a very clear statement about upholding the Christian faith, so that the country is still, certainly historically and even legally, built on legal foundations that are Christian. So that invites the question, do pastors, among many other people, have the right to proclaim the Christian gospel in public, yes or no? Well, the law says, yes, you do absolutely have that right. So these sorts of cases should not be materialising, and it's very concerning that police resources are heavily invested in cases such as Pastor Peter, and also in so many other cases that we're hearing before the Commission. It's not just one complaint and one police officer or one human resources manager being involved. There's a whole multi-layer participation of different aspects of the establishment and society involving itself with someone's freedom to speak. It's coming at it from all angles. I'll just say very briefly, Isabel Vaughan Spruce, whose case is world famous throughout the world now, I suppose. She silently prayed outside an abortion clinic. She was arrested on 2 occasions for doing that. She was found not to have committed any offence.
Surprising that.
So this raises the question, are you even allowed to have thoughts? She didn't demonstrate anything verbally when she was there. She didn't stop any woman from entering the clinic. In fact, on the 2 occasions she was arrested, if I remember correctly, the clinic was closed. She was there praying on the opposite side of the road. Who was she offending exactly? I'm not aware of anyone being offended. So in these particular cases, the worrying thing is the state wants to get involved even in your mind. In fact, one of the police officers asked her in the station when she was locked up in a cell for a few hours, what were you thinking when you said, you said you were praying in your head? What exactly were you praying about? Is it really any of the business of the police officer to ask such questions? Her belongings were removed. She was searched entirely, throughout her body. She was put through a thorough search. It was very humiliating for her, as you can imagine. The area had what they call a public space protection order around it, which means you couldn't protest within that particular area near the clinic. But actually it didn't say anything about prayer. So she was of the understanding, which made sense, that if I'm praying silently, I'm not violating that particular rule in the area.
But how can they prove that she's praying?
Well, they did ask her at the time.
They can ask her and she can give an opinion, but how can you effectively charge someone from actually praying?
That's a very good question.
Because where's the evidence? You're just having her word for the fact that she prayed, and okay, you're not allowed to pray at an abortion clinic. This is Orwellian, beyond Orwellian. She
and her colleagues, when there have been other people with her on different occasions, they have faced multiple incidences of physical assault from passers-by and the most horrible verbal abuse. The police take absolutely no notice of that. They're not interested.
No, that's horrible. This is why it's so important to raise awareness regarding this. And Peter, do you think with the policing, there's a two-tier policing that we're seeing at the moment? I mean, 13 police officers came to arrest you, and yet what we've seen in the streets of London and throughout major cities in this country ever since October the 7th has been massive pro-Palestinian protests with chants of genocide, and yet the police are turning a blind eye to all of that and allowing it to go ahead, and you just go and speak from your heart and what the Word of God is saying about biblical values, and you get stopped by 13 police officers. But you can chant jihad and violence against the state and get away with it.
Yes, I think there is hard evidence out there now of double standards in the police. Some groups are looked upon more favourably than others. And when I have been challenged by the police, once or twice I've actually asked them, I've said, would you be challenging me in this way if I was an Islamic imam? And they have said, oh yes, we would. But I just felt that was useful to make that point. So yeah, I think the police need to look into their approach, because on this occasion in Uxbridge, a policeman actually said to me when I challenged him, I said, look, I find pride parades offensive, but I acknowledge the right for them to go ahead. I don't expect them to cancel them because I find it offensive. And the police officer said to me, yeah, and it's right that the Metropolitan Police supports the Pride Parade. So I thought, oh dear, this is not exactly impartiality.
No, that's a problem. And Peter, I kind of share with us as well that Nick Fletcher, who wrote the forward report for the interim Commission of Enquiry looking into the discrimination against Christians, sadly he lost his seat at the last election, but did a fantastic job in standing up for Christians in this country. He said in his forward report that he said that the fact that there were 1,562 Christians who responded to the call to share how they feel as being Christians and feeling that they're under attack. So over 1,500 people so far in the first part of the interim report have said that they feel like they're under attack as a Christian, and this was obviously then given more gravitas by the fact that former Member of Parliament Nick Fletcher echoed this in his forward of this report. Share with us what that actually means in practice.
Just to clarify, when he wrote the forward for the report, he was the MP at the time, so that's an important thing to say. Yeah, it was very lovely to get his endorsement, and I just want to read a tiny extract from his own words. He says that Christianity is the cornerstone for so many of the values we take for granted. If it were not for Christianity, our tolerance, our diversity, freedom of conscience and love for our neighbour would become a thing of the past. This report needs to be circulated widely among those in human resources, those responsible for education, as well as employers, church leaders, civil servants and those responsible for policy making. And his final point is, we all need to wake up to the attack on Christianity in our society before it turns into something even more sinister. This report is a vital step in sounding the alarm. Yeah, over 1,500 people, as you say, were interviewed about a number of questions, what experiences they are having in the workplace, regarding acceptance or hostility. And can I just give you a couple of stats?
Please do. Yeah, go for it.
So 37% of people across the age range felt that they were free to say what they liked at work, only 37%. 61% of the under 35s, 61% experienced hostility or ridicule on account of their faith. And what we found was, in this particular study, which is very comprehensive, that the younger age groups are experiencing more problems with discrimination and being at receipt of hostility and so on. So that suggests what the direction of travel might be for society and where things are heading. Younger people experiencing more problems.
Yeah. And Peter, we're down to about last 3 minutes of the programme left. two parts to this question. Firstly, why did you decide to give evidence to the Commission of Enquiry looking into the discrimination against Christians? And would you recommend it for other Christians who are watching this programme that have faced discrimination because they're Christians?
Oh yes, most definitely. I would recommend approaching this commission, because we're not just talking about open air preachers here. We are talking about Christian people in the workplace, and there is a real danger now of losing your employment simply because you uphold what has been Christian teaching for the last 2,000 years. This is an outrageous state of affairs, particularly, as Robert has mentioned, because we are still a constitutionally Christian country. And the police are actually servants of the Crown. And the Crown, through our head of state, has formally promised to uphold the teachings of the Bible. And the 1688 Coronation Oath Act, whereby the monarch does say that they will govern according to the Bible, has never been repealed. It's still in force.
I hope you told that to the police, because I'd like to see how they get back to that
one.
Well,
yes.
And Robert, for our viewers who'd like to actually read the Commission of Enquiry interim report, or would even like to give evidence to the fact that they felt that they've faced discrimination either in the workplace or at home, or even as our former Conservative MP Nick Fletcher has announced, even discrimination for being a Christian in churches.
If people want to give evidence, we invite you to make contact. Please make contact with us through the website, which is on your screen. If you want to give evidence anonymously, that is absolutely fine. We can accommodate that very, very well. And by the way, if you're thinking to yourself, I'm not really going to make a fuss, I'm just going to accept this burden, whatever it might be, consider what the Apostle Paul went through when he asserted his rights as a Roman citizen. He didn't just accept what was happening, he asserted his rights as a Roman citizen. You have rights, we all have rights. Don't remain silent.
Very good. Great speech there. Thank you. And Peter, any word of advice for any future street pastors wanting to preach the gospel, the whole gospel, nothing but the gospel, in what is becoming an increasingly hostile environment, particularly in our kind of environment? You've got 10 seconds.
Right. We must not succumb to the chill factor. Part of the preaching of the gospel includes addressing the major issues of our time.
Wonderful. So Peter and Robert, thank you so much for doing a great job. Thank you for watching this programme at home. We have to take this new Commission of Enquiry looking into the discrimination against Christians extremely seriously, because this is giving you the right to proclaim the gospel, not only in your workplace, but in your family and in your churches in our society today. And if we don't stand up, we will lose our freedom. So thank you for watching this week's edition of Politics Today.